Good morning and welcome to the Point. Well, the Michigan presidential primary is history, and it made a little history. This morning, we'll take a look back and forward to find out exactly what it means with the Michigan Republican Party chairman, Ronna Romney McDaniel. Let's look back at what has been a pretty remarkable week for politics, and let's start kind of further back than that. This primary date, when it was set, from my perspective as an observer, I was like, ho hum, nothing's going to happen. We're right between Super Tuesday and a bunch of winner-take-all states. Nobody's going to come here. Nobody's going to bother with us. Well, I stand corrected. This ended up being for your party, the Republicans, and for the Democrats, an amazing concentration of effort and time and attention. What do you make of this?
Well, I always felt like our primary was going to be a key date because I'd lived through 2012 and had seen how Michigan was in play hugely for Mitt Romney. Nobody had thought Michigan was going to matter then, and then he came in and then won, and that was a springboard to winning Ohio. So I knew, based on where, that March 1st, all those southern states and Michigan, we had about 3 other states with us, and I'm like, oh, we're perfectly located to be the precursor to those all-important March 15th dates. It's been great for our state. It was a winning day for our state all across the board to have record turnout, Democrat and Republican. Michigan won on March 8th.
It's interesting to hear you say that because I've talked with your counterpart, Brandon Dillon, over the Michigan Democratic Party, and he says the same thing, that this was good, no matter who you're supporting. Obviously, you're not supporting his candidates, and he's not supporting yours, but it was good from both of your perspectives because you did get so much attention. I know Sunday night you were at the Democratic debate in Flint, and they dealt with a lot of very specific Michigan, not just Flint issues, but Michigan issues. Almost, you got the sense that you were in Iowa for a minute because they were paying that kind of attention. That's got to be good for the state.
It was great. A lot of that depended upon the network.
Sure.
CNN chose to make their debate specific to Michigan. Fox had a section on Michigan issues and chose to focus on other issues. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more Michigan-specific questions being asked of our candidates. But on the other side, the Democratic debate didn't cover national security and certainly didn't go after some of the things on Hillary Clinton that I think voters want to know about with regards to the secret server and the immunity deal that just was given to one of her staffers, and so on. So overall, it's been great to have debates in Michigan, to have our primary date, to have our voters engaged, to have a record turnout. That is good for democracy, and it's definitely good for our state.
Talk to me about this process because, for example, you think about putting together a debate, and I know that the RNC was doing this, but I have to believe that you at the state party were certainly helping to coordinate. I don't think people quite understand. You have the debate at the Fox Theater. You have thousands of people in one aspect or another, either those who are attending or all of those of us who are covering, so much so that you go next door to this huge restaurant. The entire place is rented out, and that becomes the media center. What kind of coordination does that take to do? I mean, this was a big undertaking.
I wish I could say we did have a lot to do with it, but really it is the RNC and Fox News. They plan the debate. Now, I did go to Washington, D.C. when I was elected chair and ask for a debate in Michigan, and I did advocate for our state. But in terms of the planning, they kind of come in, they take over, they leave, and they help the state party get tickets, but they even allocate us a certain amount, and we don't get any more than what they give us. So they did a great job. It was great for Detroit to showcase the comeback, the turnaround that we've seen in that wonderful city, and to have that be highlighted. And I hope they continue to come back to our state and see the growth and the progress we're making in Michigan.
I always make reference to this, but you're a political animal kind of like I am. Yours may be more DNA related, but the fact of the matter is that in the 2 decades that I have covered presidential primaries and presidential politics in this state, I have never seen the kind of intensity that we saw over the past 10 days. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that. It had been about 16 years since we've had Republicans and Democrats on the same date competing in that primary, but it's been fantastic even beyond the past 10 days. Since I've been chair, we've had 30 plus visits from Republican candidates in Michigan, and the crowds they've received and the the voters coming out in droves to come and spend time with these candidates and ask them questions one-on-one. I haven't seen anything like that in our state for a long time, and certainly I've lived through presidential elections here. Even with Mitt, I didn't see the type of crowds as early as we did this time. So what's interesting is the voters are very, very concerned. They're worried about where is this country going? What is the path that we are going to set for ourselves, because Republicans feel like we are on the wrong course. And if we do not change course, we will not recognize our country after 8 years. So they are engaged, and they showed it on March 8th.
When you look at those numbers, and when you look at places in West Michigan, for example, we started getting calls pretty early in the day that places were running out of ballots because so many people were turning up, and some were Democratic ballots that were running out, some were Republican. You say people are concerned, but what is it that they're concerned about? Because the two candidates, and we're going to talk about this as we get a little deeper into this, but the two candidates that appear to really have tapped into something out there, and while some people say, well, they can't possibly be talking to the same crowd, to some degree I believe they are, is Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And they are really talking about something that is different than what we have now. Why is there that angst?
I've thought about it a lot, actually, and I'm a mom. And sometimes I have to go really advocate for my kids. You know, you just go to school and something's wrong, and I get in there and I get in the grill of that teacher, and I advocate for my child. And I feel like a lot of the voters and the citizens around this country feel like they have not had an advocate in Washington in a long time. And I see that when Obamacare comes down upon a small business owner in Michigan and their premiums go up $200 a month and their deductible is now $10,000 out of pocket for the first major issue. That's huge on a family, and nobody's advocating or telling their story. And so I feel like these two candidates on the Republican and Democrat side, the voters have decided they are going to advocate for me. They're going to fight for me. And I believe that all of our candidates on the Republican side have shown their willingness to get in there and fight for the American voter.
The angst that is out there has manifested itself in some unusual turnouts, which is not always the case. Sometimes when people are angry, it actually suppresses the vote. Apparently that part's over, because I don't know what your numbers were for Republicans, but overall the Secretary of State seems to think that we got pretty close to turning record numbers. So how do you, as a party chairman, notwithstanding whatever happens between now and Cleveland, and again, as I say, we're going to talk about that, but how do you keep people engaged? Because all of this happened, it was a big week, and it could be pretty quiet around here until we get pretty close to the conventions, because those candidates are going to have other places they need to be attending to.
Well, they've been engaged already. So for me as chair, we've got to communicate with them. We've got to reach out to them. We've got to share what we're doing as a party to put our convention together, to work towards the election, to build our ground game. So we've got to be interfacing with them on a regular basis, and we're certainly going to be doing that. And I have to advocate for the voters as chair. I have to say to them, I'm going to follow your will. The voters get to decide who the nominee is, and I'm going to be an advocate for their voice as chair of the Republican Party and make sure that they know that I'm going to work hard to bring everybody together and unite around our nominee so we can win the White House.
Let's talk a little bit about your convention. You just mentioned that. So on Tuesday, Republicans went to the polls and they elected Donald Trump as the primary winner in the state. Two other candidates, Ted Cruz coming in second and John Kasich coming in third, will all qualify for delegates in the proportional allocation, as I understand it. That will be done at your convention, which comes up in April.
Correct.
So that process has already gotten started. So we'll know then who is more or less going to head off to Cleveland and cast those votes, at least cast those votes in the first round, we assume. What else has to be done to get ready for the Michigan delegates to go to the national convention?
Well, I sit on the committee on arrangements for the RNC, so there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes. I mean, imagine how much coordination it takes to block the hotel rooms, to figure out the transportation from the convention center to each of the hotels, to make sure the delegations are going to have the best possible experience. So that's been going on for over a year. At the state level, we're coordinating with all of our elected officials to make sure that We can have events that our delegates can go to. It's all about the delegates. The delegates represent the grassroots of our state, and we want to make sure they have the best possible experience as they come to Cleveland. We need everybody energized. We need them pulling together around that nominee if we're going to have any chance to win the White House. So it's going to be fantastic. I've really enjoyed working on the Committee on Arrangements, and Cleveland has done an excellent job.
Well, you and I were in Cleveland earlier this year for the very first Republican debate, as a matter of fact, in the same venue, and it's a great facility right in downtown Cleveland. But it does kind of beg the question, if you remember that setup, the way the security was set up and everything is cordoned off. Again, this is a huge undertaking. How do you get your delegates ready for what is kind of a maze operationally of getting in, out, and knowing what they can and can't do? Because these conventions, from a security standpoint, but also from an operational standpoint, are pretty buttoned down.
They are, and the security perimeter in Cleveland, I believe, will be tighter than it was in Tampa, for example. Tampa had some hotels within the security perimeter. We'll have to communicate with them regularly. We'll travel as a delegation. We'll be sending them information. We'll have emails. I believe we're going to develop an app for them. Everything's going to be done to make sure they have the best possible experience. But we're there as a Michigan family, so it's a great experience for us to work together and represent our state in that important nomination process.
More about Michigan's primary and what lies ahead in the general next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Ronna Romney McDaniel is the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party. We talked to her about the primary just passed and what to expect going forward. You said just a minute ago that you're going to be at the convention as a Michigan family. There is the possibility there could be a family feud. Now, we know that as you and I sit here right now, Donald Trump has a lead in the delegates, or at least the pledged delegates. We also know that going forward, that there are some winner-take-all states that could have a big impact on John Kasich, for example, in his home state of Ohio, or Marco Rubio in his home state of Florida. And without making a guess what happens, whether they win or lose in those places, there is the possibility that you could go to Cleveland without somebody with the 1,200 and whatever prerequisite delegates. How does that change the mix if it happens?
I don't even know how that's going to change. I mean, I know there's a lot of speculation. I think March 15th will give a lot of clarity to what is going to happen in terms of candidates being able to reach that all-important 1,237 delegates. It's going to be a lot of work. We're going to have more work ahead of us if we come into a convention without a solid nominee that we all know has reached that threshold. So we're going to have to talk together, work as a family. We always say, you know, families have disagreements, but we can come together in the end, and our purpose will unite us. But that will be a challenge that we would have to face if that does happen.
To the degree that you know, I know that there are a lot of these things that are being speculated about, but my understanding is these delegates are bound for that first round. So
Yes.
if you go in and nobody has the 1,200 plus, then you still go ahead and take that first round vote. And after that, then all of the horse trading can start, right?
Yeah, so the first vote, all delegates are bound on the Republican side to their candidate based upon the voters of their state. So, and I think that's a wonderful thing because we are representing the voters. The Democrats are different. They have these super delegates, which are elected officials in the establishment of their party. And you'll see Hillary Clinton, even though her and Bernie Sanders are neck and neck a lot of times in the states, she's amassing a huge super delegate lead because, of course, she has a lot more relationships with the party elite on the Democrat side. I'm glad we have it the way we have it. That second ballot, delegates are free to choose whomever they want to vote for. Those are the rules. I do think if we start heading into a nominating convention in Cleveland, it will make our April convention that much more pivotal because candidates will come in and want to make sure not only is that first delegate bound to them, but they have a true believer or a faithful supporter that will stay with them on that second ballot. So I think all the state conventions will become much more pivotal if it looks like we're heading towards a nominating contest.
And as you say, by next Tuesday, we'll have a pretty good idea about that, or could have, right?
I think March 15th will give some clarity. And once you start going into the winner-take-all states, the delegate pots are so huge. I mean, now they're, Michigan, we parceled it up and it's proportional. But when you get 99 delegates from Florida or 66 from Ohio, that becomes hard to beat if it goes to one candidate. We'll see what happens.
So let me just set the scene for people, because this is the point of conversation that I have heard more since the primary here in Michigan than anything else. I described it in a news meeting recently of, think about it like this. You're in this great big high school and you're running for class president, and you have to get enough people together to help you get there. I know that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but this is a microcosm of running for president, because now the only people that you can influence are the people who have already been selected as delegates. And if you've been successful and you found somebody who is truly committed to you, then that's good. But now you've got to go out and find somebody who may be truly committed to somebody else and get them to come over. So what does that look like? Do you have people wandering the floor trying to talk to people and trying to make deals to try to garner that majority vote? Because most of us have never seen anything like a contested or a nominating convention.
Well, absolutely. And I've actually run at a convention. I ran as a convention as chair, and you have your influencers in each district. I'm sure they'll have that in each state. And you have people that are having conversations and saying, hey, come on over with me. And we have had these types of nominating conventions previously in our party. I've been reading about Lincoln and the 1860 convention. I imagine that's going to be all critical. And you'll start to see the candidates start being maybe a little nicer to each other, because they'll want their delegate pot to come to them. And it's like the ultimate game of Risk, I guess.
Well, and it is, and as you say, it has been done, but it hasn't been done in modern history that most of the players will have participated in. I mean, 1976 in Kansas City, it was a tight convention, but it was a little different than what this potentially could be. Now, I should point out that I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen.
No, but you're excited about it, because
well, of course,
everybody's excited about it.
Sure,
I don't want
no,
to.
You're not, I'm sure not. Well, but that does bring me to my next question. Well, let me ask one more question about that process, and then we'll get on to that. The other possibility is then that as these people are going around and trying to garner votes and get people together, and I won't mention names, but we know that there are 4 candidates right now that would seem the most likely that could be in that mix. They are not the only people that can participate. So if a consensus can't be found behind one of those candidates that is currently in the race, a candidate who had previously been in the race, or a candidate who had never been in the race, could also emerge. So this isn't limited just to the names that we're talking about today. This could be pretty much the wild, wild west, depending on the mood of the people at that convention.
Yes, once that first ballot is cast and you cast your vote for whomever you're bound to, it's open, and it can end up going to 33 ballots or 40 ballots. I hope not, but it could go a long time before you find that consensus candidate, which you need to find. And then there would be a lot of healing to do if that's the case, because if it's not, say, one of the 4 candidates that have run and maybe take it all the way to the convention, how do you bring those voters back over and have them feel like that the process was fair? So it will be a lot of work. I hope it doesn't go to that. In a lot of ways, I think we're better off solidifying around a nominee and making sure we have that person in place before that convention.
But the other part of that process that you were just talking about would be that you, as a state party chairman, would have to come home from Cleveland and talk to that family again and say, look, this is how this worked. The rules were in place. Everybody knew the rules going in, assuming that rules aren't changed, which I assume you would not advocate. And so that would be the next layer of what could be a very complicated election for Republicans.
It is, but then you can start talking about what's at stake. So let's talk about what's at stake. We have the Supreme Court at stake, potentially 3 seats in this next presidency. That's going to live far beyond whomever's in the White House for the next 8 years. And that can change the whole fabric of our nation. There's so much more at stake in terms of economic security, national security. Our country's not in a place that's better than it was 8 years ago. So as we talk about the things that are at stake and you talk about the importance of the future of this country, I think our voters will coalesce around that purpose and support that nominee. It may be harder, it may take a little longer, it may take a little more nuance, but we need to do that. And I'm willing to put all the work I can in to make sure that our nominee is successful and we win the White House, because I do know what's at stake.
It wasn't just Republicans that were having an election on Tuesday. Democrats did too. I follow polls closely because that's one of the few ways I can really get a sense of what's going on. On the day before the election, we had 3 polls that showed John Kasich moving from 4th place up to mid-20s, being within about 15 points of Donald Trump. By the time Tuesday night rolled around, it appeared that those polls were spot on. Those same polls suggested that Bernie Sanders was 20 or 25 points behind Secretary Clinton, and by 11:35 on Tuesday night, Bernie Sanders had won most of the counties, by far the majority of the counties. He had stayed close in the big counties like Macomb and Oakland. He lost Wayne County, but the turnout in Wayne County wasn't sufficient enough to make the difference. And Hillary Clinton lost Michigan. Was that something that was even on your radar?
No, yeah, it was. I saw the debate. I was there. I thought he did a very good job in their debate, sharing why he believed he was best to represent Michigan. But I'll tell you why it was on my radar, really. Hillary Clinton has a trust issue. She has a trust issue that she has created. And voters in Michigan showed overwhelmingly that they do not trust her in the White House. And Democrat voters, that should be a real concern for her. She should have won Michigan based on her history, based on the time she spent here. It shows a real weakness in her as a candidate. And why don't they trust her? Well, because she does anything, she'll do anything to get elected. And we've seen that time and time again in her history. She'll say, I'm for this, and then she'll change her position, like TPP. Initially it was a great deal, now it's not a great deal. She says, I'm for women's issues and I support women's causes, and then she'll take money from the Clinton Foundation from countries that are horrendous to women. She'll say, I'm for transparency, and then she puts classified, top secret emails on a private server, not for the interest of our country, but for her own interests. I do think voters are saying to themselves, Hillary Clinton is running for president more because she wants to be the first woman president than because she cares about me. And we're starting to see that in this election.
And the final question, and this goes back to the conversation that we had, because I know you and I were both at both of the debates. On one hand, you had Flint, where you had Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, who mixed it up a little bit, but they talked about specifics and they talked about their issues. In Detroit, you had Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, who mixed it up a lot. Ted Cruz joined in, and then you had John Kasich, who many people thought was kind of standing off to the side, maybe on the appropriate side of the stage. What are debates' values for parties as you're going into these primaries? Because it appears to me that both of these debates had an impact on the outcome on Tuesday. I think John Kasich's performance helped him move from number 4 to a tie for number 2. And I think that Bernie Sanders' performance may well have helped him in what was already a pretty big head of steam that he had developed in the state.
Well, you get to see the candidate. You get to see how they respond to tough questions, how they're going to respond in their debate when they face the Republican or Democrat ultimately. But we have seen a lot of differentiation with our candidates on policy issues like immigration, like national security, like economic issues. And I think that's great for the voters to hear their plans on things like Social Security and our national debt and our military readiness. So those things have come out through the course of this election. That's good for the voters. It's important for them to vet those candidates. I know that I am looking for someone who can stand up against Hillary Clinton in that debate. I do want somebody to be able to talk to her and ask her about these tough questions that really haven't come out in the Democrat debates because Bernie Sanders has decided not to go there. But these are issues that the American public do need to know about before they consider her as commander-in-chief.
It is, of course, a long time between now and the general election day. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. To the point. Last week's presidential primary here in Michigan showed us a couple of things. One is there is a lot of interest in what's going on in politics. More of you turned out to vote than ever before. It also showed that those so-called outsiders are the ones that most people prefer. Professional politicians need not apply. We'll be talking about what that means for this year's election and for the country going forward every Sunday morning when you join us. To the point.